Hey, everybody. Welcome back to We Want Winners, our first show in a couple weeks since the Super Bowl. I think that's kind of going to be our schedule, is unless something really happens, we'll probably go every couple weeks. Though when it comes to the draft, I'm sure we'll figure something out as we get closer to the draft. But Rod, how you doing, man?
I am doing great. It's kind of nice having kind of a break here. Although today I was out at my nephew is like a pretty high level football player, and they were having a 7-on-7 tournament. My brother tells me, "Hey, come on out." I don't know what I was expecting, but that was crazy.
Where
It
does he
was
play?
like
Let's give him a shout out.
He plays at Bishop Gorman High School here in Las Vegas. They're one of the best teams in the country. He's a linebacker. But there were like 170 teams out there at this 7-on-7 tournament, and
Wow.
it was madness. And man, some of these kids are talented. There were some quarterbacks out there; those dudes were slinging it. Just
Throwing the
big.
ball a little bit better than some of those XFL quarterbacks I saw.
Oh man. I mean, and these big kids. I mean, calling them kids. I mean, these are men. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just it's ridiculous. Amateur sports these days are just, I mean, it's big business.
Yeah.
It really is. So yeah, shout out to Bishop Gorman. And yeah, it was impressive. That whole scene out there was nice. But I'm glad to be back here with you guys.
Hey, so wait, just one more thing on your nephew. So what year is he?
He is a sophomore.
Oh, wow. So he's still young.
Yeah, he's real young. But yeah, varsity. Yeah, and um, Gorman is a kind of a powerhouse. DTR went there. DeMarco Murray. They put a lot of guys in all sports. In the pros, but yeah, it's a real that whole dynamic is it's a real interesting ecosystem.
That's cool. No, I
Yeah,
would love to hear more about him. That's kind of cool. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, if you go to that kind of school, then colleges are constantly watching that kind of
yeah,
school. So hopefully he plays
yeah,
well this year.
yeah.
Okay, so before we even get into the body of this show, we have a little website out there now. bspnmedia.com. It auto publishes all of our podcasts, our YouTube videos. There's even a blog component. So I may do a little bit of writing here and there. Other people may do a little bit of writing here and there if they want. But yeah, so check it out. bspnmedia.com is just a way for us to spread the word about our shows a little bit more. Kind of get into those Google searches as people looking for podcasts about the 49ers or the Giants or the Warriors, and maybe we'll even get some more local folks who want to come on, because I am looking for stuff about the A's or the Sharks or the Quakes. The MLS has a new contract with Apple TV, so I know they started this weekend. So hit me up at gg@bspnmedia.com. One last thing, which is we have a new podcast that I started, which is you have a lot of these news organizations, NPR. I believe the New York Times does one where they kind of like do this really like first thing in the morning. Here's like a 5 to 10 minute podcast that kind of catches you up on what's going on. And we only have 3 shows a week, so there are 4 other days in which we don't have shows. And if there is news, all 3 sports are not always going on at the same time. That happens around October-ish time frame where all 3 sports are kind of going. But more often than not, there's 2 going at once. So I published the very first one last week, which was we had Brock Purdy with his elbow swelling news. We had Andrew Wiggins. He wasn't playing. He has some personal time off for the Warriors, and then spring training was just starting for the Giants. So it was kind of cool to do that. I think it was like 8 minutes long. So there will be more of those shows probably more along the line of once a week. And if there's important stuff, then maybe more than once a week. But the idea behind that show is right when you wake up, you load up your podcast feed, and there's a show right there for you that's really quick, that catches you up on anything you may have missed. So I want to shout that out. That's also going to be in this feed and also on YouTube for people watching on video. All right. Go ahead. No, you were going to say something.
No. I just said beautiful. That's awesome.
Okay. So on the topic of one Brock Purdy and his elbow, you and I haven't had a chance to talk about this yet, but they were supposed to do surgery last week. The elbow had some swelling, so they decided against it and they postponed the surgery. Now, why is that important? I think it's important because every day he doesn't get the surgery, we don't know what the exact surgery is. I know they don't think they're going to need to have the reconstructive surgery, but I don't think they know 100% sure until he goes under the knife. And two, if they keep pushing it out, even the other surgery that he does, that kind of pushes out the time frame of him being able to throw. So what do you think about this? Like, the 49ers are trying to play this as if it's fine, no big deal. He'll be ready. He'll be able to throw. And I think it's maybe a little bit too positive. And I get why. Like you don't, you have this quarterback situation that they've had over the last few years, and any sort of information about it is seemingly always negative. So I get why they're trying to be positive here. But what is your take on this situation?
For someone who has no baseball talent at all, I was a terrible player. I have relatives. My uncles were very good baseball players, and my nephew. So it's like, for me, like, skipped a generation. My uncles were really good players, and my nephew is a really good baseball player. And in that ecosystem, this injury is real commonplace. And one thing that I know about it from talking to them and people that they know is that the notion that in that press conference, in Kyle's last press conference, when he was talking about the doctors telling him 6 months guaranteed he'd be not only rehabbed but throwing and ready to go, that without having gone into the arm yet, that was a pipe dream. There's no way of knowing. And it has borne out exactly the way those people who have knowledge of this told me it was. That, number one, there's no way to know when the surgery is going to happen because of things like this with the swelling and all of that. Then two, once we get in there, the doctors have said, the surgeons have said just that they have no idea. MRI only tells you so much. My uncle was fond of saying when we would go on road trips that the map is not the terrain. You just don't know. What the MRI says is it can only give the surgeon so much information. He won't know until he actually gets in there and sees what's happening.
Yeah.
Then once that's done, they get him all sewn up and he starts to rehab. We have no idea how he's going to respond to said procedure and treatment. And then lastly, the fear of any thrower is, once you're rehabbed and done all of this, the first time you go out there to actually let it rip, what happens? There are just so many unknowns. And I understand wanting to be positive and not wanting to be, I don't want to be a negative Nancy or negative Nate, whatever. But there's just so many question marks all along the way that I think it's best, let's be positive that we want the best for Brock, but let's not be trying to put any kind of timetables on this thing, because anything that we're saying, it's just a guess. It's a guess. So, but even if we say 6 months, we're now at the point that it's definitely going to be sometime in March at this point before we even, what they're saying, before we even reconsider scheduling anything. So now we're talking about March, which if we take the light end of it, which is 6 months, 6 to 9 months, we're already in September, so we're talking about Brock hasn't thrown a football, and we're coming up at this point on week 1. So he's going to completely miss training camp. And so even if you agree that no matter what Trey does throughout the whole offseason and all of preseason, that somehow you believe that Brock has done enough previously that it's his job, I don't know. That just seems that's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. Would you really want to like roll him out there week 1 after not having done any, even if you believe he is the rightful starter? That seems optimistic to think that he would be out there under center under those circumstances week 1. It's just, and then what if it's 9 months? Then we're talking about, September, October, November. We're talking December. Same thing. Do we just roll him out there week 6 with no training camp? And so there's just a lot there that I think the first thing we need to do is just get this dude healthy and see what we've got, see what Trey is doing, and then kind of go from there. There's a lot up in the air right now. Just a lot.
Here's my ask of 49er fans. Can we agree? Because I've seen a lot of this stuff on there. Oh, Trey, they gave him a shot and he had 2 bad games. I'm like, the dude didn't even get to play in the second game. And the first game was in a monsoon. Like, it was, who can throw the football in that weather? Justin Fields didn't throw the football in that weather either. So what I want from 49er fans is, can we give this guy a fair shake? Can he go through training camp? Can he go through the preseason? Can he go through as QB1? And the majority, or maybe it's not the majority, maybe I'm just seeing the crazies, but the people who are already considering him a failure, like, can we see what he can do with George Kittle? Can we see what he can do with Christian McCaffrey? Like, that's also part of it. Last year, they didn't have Kittle, and they hadn't traded for McCaffrey yet. So I would just really like to see, and some of this is injury luck, some of this is him, really working his ass off this summer. But let's see what we have with everybody, with what Brock basically fell into, which was a terrific offense when it came to weapons. And this is not an anti-Brock statement. I want the best guy to be QB1, and that's Kyle's job. I do not root against Brock Purdy. I do not root against Trey Lance. I want both guys to succeed, and may the best QB win. I just hate to see the negativity around Trey because of what the 49ers traded to get him. That was not his fault. He was just sitting there as the third pick in the draft on just about everybody's draft board, and the 49ers went up to get him. He does not have to play equal to 3 number 1 draft picks immediately to not be a failure. That's the part that bothers me about this whole process.
There are several things. And again, number one thing that moving forward, that I learned from the Jimmy Garoppolo time here is that it's important for me personally to divorce my feelings about the player, because what ended up happening is the Jimmy stands put me in a position where I felt like I was attacking Jimmy. But Jimmy, I don't, when I really go back and think, I don't have anything against Jimmy. Jimmy Garoppolo is who he is, and he hasn't he just, that's just it. He's the player he always was. He never really did anything to um raise my ire. My issue is with the people who were coming with the Pat Mahomes memes, coming with the Tom Brady memes, those who were trying to shoehorn him into the elite quarterback conversation based solely on the fact of the win-loss record of the team and not his individual performance. Those are the people that I have a problem with. I never had a problem with Jimmy Garoppolo. Fast forward, I'm not going to let those people who are putting these outsized expectations on Brock Purdy to affect my feeling about him as a quarterback. I'm rooting for him, and I like all of the things that I have seen. I have questions about whether or not a guy who profiles like him can be a face of the franchise, quarterback one.
Yeah.
But I don't think that from where he came from, that he has to be that for him to be successful. I think that what he's done already from his beginnings is magnificent. I
Yep.
mean, if he goes on to be a career QB2 from where they drafted him, that is a huge win. I've done a lot of research, which we'll get into as we move along. Because I mean, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to start doing comparisons until he gets healthy.
Yeah.
But guys who profile like him, I mean, it's a tough ask. Some of the guys who have started more than 100 games, who are his size, it's an interesting list. Let's just say that. And where he fits on the spectrum of those guys, it's interesting. The part that I'm more, as I work through that, there's some older guys like Jim Hart and Dave Craig and that type of player that I don't have a real grasp on talent wise where they fit in as it related to their peers.
You're going back late 70s, early 80s. I like it.
So again, like guys like Russell Wilson or Michael Vick or Kyler Murray, I have a very good feeling of where Brock Purdy fits talent-wise as it relates to those guys. Those other guys, I don't know. Another interesting one is like Mike Tomczak. You know, Mike Tomczak like started like over 100 games in the league, which is crazy. He was Jim McMahon's backup as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
But he played a lot of games.
They were generally fine with him playing because McMahon was hurt a lot because he had such a good team.
Right. And so again, it's interesting. So it's gonna be, and then let's go to Trey. Like you talked about, it's interesting that people want to hold where he was drafted against him. And I mean, that's clearly not fair. But what's also not fair is trying to project or predict the type of player he's going to be after 4 NFL starts. I was here for the Alex Smith. I saw every game Alex played here. And let me tell you, 4 games in, Alex Smith had a hard time getting his team in and out of the huddle. Alex Smith couldn't, 4 games in, he could not play under center.
Yeah.
that was just not what he did in college.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can go down the list. I did a post about this, and maybe I'll revisit this as we go forward. Guys like Steve Young, Troy Aikman, um, Peyton Manning. The list goes on, and there are a lot of players who did a lot of great things in this league. If you look at their stats after 4 games, they weren't as good as what Trey's numbers are. But it's such a small sample size. And strangely, even somebody who I never agree with, Greg Cosell, said the same thing about Brock. 8 games it's too small of a sample size to make any kind of broad predictions either way about what kind of player he's going to be. It's just too soon for either of them. So I know that's not fun, but that's not fun because that's not what we do on social media.
Well,
being rational and saying,
yeah,
well, let's just wait and see.
It's
not fun.
The thing that you're saying about Brock is 100% sure. You're 100% right, except fans look at QB as the star of the team. And that's really how the NFL works, face of the organization, like you said. And the 49er fans desperately want that player. They wanted Jimmy to be that player. And it turned out that Jimmy was not that player. He was, he was a serviceable guy. He was an average to above average guy at an above average in certain times as well. But he wasn't going to be the guy to take you to the promised land. Like I think we saw enough of it, playoffs and everything, that just was not the case. So fans desperately want Brock to be that guy. They want him to be, Aaron Rodgers has been Green Bay Packers quarterback for all of these years. We want that stability. We don't want to have to worry about that role because the 49ers have had to worry about that role so much. We remember the two good Alex Smith seasons, but there were like 4 or 5 before that where he was getting hurt. Coaches were killing him. He was kind of killing coaches back. And so we only had those 2 Alex Smith seasons and the 2 Kaepernick seasons. And those are really it as far as stability. And it was a short time span. And then since Cap, it's been, up and down, and Jimmy was kind of there. So I get the wanting to anoint him because you're just trying to say, like, please, let's just have a guy here. I am just not ready to say Brock is the guy and Trey isn't. Kyle may realize that, and then they'll have to figure out what to do with Trey. But until they figure that out, I am very much up for this quarterback competition, which should make both players even better having to compete for their spots, because there's an urgency there. There's an expectation there. We've been privy to the greatest quarterback competition in the history of the NFL with Joe Montana and Steve Young. So this area knows all about that. It's not going to be that. They won't allow it to be that. And neither guy is of that stature. Probably will never get to that stature, because if they do, then they're one of the top 10 quarterbacks of all time. So I just would like 49er fans to just, pull back a little bit, because it's like what you said. If we set Brock up to fail and he's not this 10-year starting quarterback, then it almost looks like he's a failure, when in reality, he has already succeeded based on his expectation.
And that is what you perfectly, that's my concern, is that we are setting this kid up to fail. Not only setting him up to fail, but what I would hate to happen is for him to feel, and it's probably no way that he doesn't feel pressure to get back out there as soon as possible to continue the momentum that he has already built. But he's 23 years old, and I see him, and again, I know there are a lot of us that disagree. Everybody, they want to make him, like you had said, they want to make these comparisons to Drew Brees and Kurt Warner. I don't see that in this dude, or Joe Montana, which is ridiculous to compare anybody to Joe Montana. Joe Burrow is a very good young quarterback, but ain't nobody to paraphrase Bill Belichick with a lot of due respect, a lot of respect to a lot of great players. We're talking about Lawrence Taylor. We're talking about Joe Montana. There's Joe Montana, and then drop off a lot of other good players. So it's not that. When I look at Brock Purdy, I see Case Keenum, Colt McCoy, which if he had that career coming from 262, that's a great career and it's a great draft pick. Mm-hmm. But I like you said, people want a 10-year all-pro player. But what I'm saying is I number one, don't want to set him up to fail, that if he is not a top 10 quarterback, that somehow he is a failure.
Yeah.
Number two, I would hate for him to be trying to rush back to get, to capitalize on that momentum and not be able to, not to fulfill whatever maybe his career path and trajectory might have been if, maybe we're in a situation here where the reconstruction is what was warranted, but he opted for something less than that because he wanted to get back out there faster to capitalize on that momentum. And then he finds himself 3-5 years from now still dealing with the aftermath of this injury because of a short-term decision that was made, where a decision that was made for his, that benefited him in the short term when we should have been thinking long-term. I know the team normally is the one who is pushing for short-term solutions. And sometimes the players are too. I just hope that everybody in this situation has his best interest long-term at heart right now. That's what I hope. But, that's
the NFL, man.
It's not often the case.
Spits you out.
It's not often the case.
By the way, for the video folks, is that Jam Master Jay behind you?
Yeah, I'm in my brother's recording studio.
That's tight. I love it. And I can't see the one to your left or to my left, to your right.
Dr. Dre.
Okay. I thought I see about a quarter of his face. I was like, it kind of looks like Dre, but I'm not sure. Yep. Those are great. I need to get some of those for my office. Okay. So, we had talked about the idea of bringing in a third guy. And there are these guys, the Nate Sudfelds of the world, the little Nickies of the world, who Kyle seems to really enjoy coaching. There's a possibility of them trying to find whoever the new Brock is in the draft this upcoming season. I've heard Jacoby Brissett's name bandied about. We talked about Andy Dalton, I think the last time. But are you still on the idea that if they bring in a guy, it's not going to be a name guy?
I think for a lot of reasons, no. And number one, and I think we touched on this the last time, and I just feel even more strongly that number one, as Kyle outlined, I just don't think they're going to spend the amount of money that it would cost to bring in a top end QB2 / QB bridge kind of starter kind of guy, like an Andy Dalton, or I don't know where you figure Jacoby Brissett is in that whole mix. I don't know. And then, people are talking about guys like, Derek Carr, and that's that's ridiculous. Those guys are it's just even a Jimmy Garoppolo returning. Those guys are just going to make way too much money.
Kyle, I think Kyle already told us his thoughts on that one.
Yeah. And, so I think we're going to, and then the other side of it, I think, as we hit on before, what would those guys, what would their interest be in coming into a situation that it clearly seems that if both of these guys are healthy, which again, with Brock is a legitimate question, but if that were the case, they are clearly the 49ers choice
Yep.
of being 1 and 2.
Yep.
So at that point, barring injury or just horrible performance, you are at best QB2. You're not even being considered as a starter because they want either one of those guys to grab the reins, and you would believe those guys would be given every opportunity to be QB1, and then whoever is not QB1 out of that would, you would figure would be QB2. So then which if you are Nate Sudfeld or Lil Nicky or CJ, maybe being QB2, QB3, QB2/QB3 is fine. But I mean, if I'm not Andy Dalton, I know I can go somewhere and be QB2. And if things fall right, maybe I can, be a starter. So why would I take that opportunity? And then I just don't think the 49ers are going to pony up. I think whoever we get, I would be shocked if whoever they sign as a veteran makes more than $3 million. It would shock me. I would think they would be more in the $1 million, $2 million range, which fits nicely with what CJ, Little Nicky, and Suddy have made over the past 2 or 3 years. And also, I've thought a lot about this. I cannot imagine a scenario that I'm not saying we won't draft somebody, because we probably will. I can't imagine that guy would be QB2 or I can't imagine us being in a position where that young guy is, one snap away from being the guy.
Right.
I would think that it would have, for that guy to get on the field, it would have to be like a Brock scenario again, where the starter goes down, then the backup goes down, and then, that guy. And even then, I would think that rookie guy would be more of a practice squatter than it. I just don't see. I don't think we're going to be in a position again where Josh Johnson, that happens to us again. I mean, yeah, it would have to be. Yeah, I just don't think that's going to be the case.
I think the only way they can bring a vet in is if there is some sort of agreement that if he is not QB2 coming out of camp, then the Niners are going to trade him or they're going to cut him before camp is over so that he gets another shot. Because I can't imagine someone like Dalton comes in and is like, I'm just here to compete, understanding what Shanahan is all about. Though, if you look at quarterback injuries for this team over the last couple years, there is some chance that QB2 is going to play a lot for this team. I don't know why. It seems fluky. Who knows exactly why? Because you can go, oh, Brock needs to get a little stronger so that he can take that kind of hit. But you look at Trey. Trey's pretty darn strong, and he just got hurt in a different way. And so, Shanahan is going to utilize the QB and expect the QB to make smart decisions and stay out of getting hurt. The way that Jimmy went down, like Jimmy doesn't, Jimmy usually gets the ball out and throws it away for that reason. So he doesn't get in those situations and just happened to be it. So if you're Andy Dalton, you're like, as long as I'm QB2, I'll be fine and I'll play because QB1's getting hurt. Like, if you go in with that mentality, I could see it, but I just don't sense that he's going to be QB2 unless something really bad happens with either Brock or Lance, because we have to also remember Lance is coming off of a major injury himself. So you got two guys going into camp, both coming off of injuries. And then so maybe that could be a little attractive to someone like Dalton, who's like, yeah, like these guys aren't going to be ready. Like I'll just come in here and you know and play better and snag it. I don't know. I don't know if he would think
Yeah,
that way.
the thing to me would be that, you know, fingers crossed that even in under the worst case scenario, you figure Brock is going to be healthy at some point. Then when he's ready to play, who knows? But I just don't think as if somebody like Andy Dalton is the example we're using, if he's my client, I can't in good conscience sign himself up for a scenario where at some point in the season, if everything goes according to plan, you're going, let's say, even if it's in just, you know, November or December, that you find yourself in a position in November that you're catching inactives and you're just, you know, you're just sitting on the bench, kind of like, you know, it's a different position, obviously, but kind of like it was with Jeff Wilson. There was a clear path that once Christian McCaffrey was here, there was going to be a time that when Eli Mitchell came back, you are going to be inactive. You're not going to be on the roster
Yeah.
weekly, which as a free agent just that is not as, you know, it's not where you want to be as a player. You don't want, even if the Niners had been willing to do it, which I didn't believe they were, you don't want to be their, you know, breaking case of glass guy. I
Yeah.
mean, that, you know, what does that do for you? I mean, okay, you get paid, but you want to, I mean, I just believe at a certain, those guys want to play. I'm not saying that a Nick Mullins doesn't want to play. I'm not saying that CJ Beathard doesn't want to play, but I think they understand the reality of their situation in a way that if Andy Dalton, even if he is, let's say the worst case scenario for him is that he ended up at the beginning of the season not on a roster. I don't think there's any way in the world that he goes 17 weeks without a job. I mean, because, you know, injuries happen. And if an injury happened, he would be, you know, everybody's first phone call. They would love that. You would love to have, you know, hell, we know when an injury would happen, you would love to have a player of Andy Dalton's quality to be available because that just simply doesn't happen. You don't, we see, you know, if your quarterback gets injured in December, we see what kind of player is available to be had in those circumstances, and it's not anybody anywhere near the quality of somebody like Andy Dalton. So it's
You think Blaine Gabbert wants to play? I think he wants to get a check.
I think it's going to be interesting because everybody, but again, at this time of year, everybody, you know, Sam Howell is, you know, Washington is comfortable with Sam Howell playing.
Yeah.
Tampa Bay is comfortable with Kyle Trask playing. And you just don't know. I don't know. What you see, you're going to see a lot in the draft this year is a lot of people believing that they are going to find the next Brock Purdy. And I think what you're seeing with a lot of teams is they're thinking that maybe they've got the next Geno Smith on there. Well, he's our backup and he's going to be able to play. I don't know. Maybe. I just think a lot of these dudes that once football starts to happen and we get closer to football, Sam Howell really is. Are we really ready to sign up for 17 games of Sam Howell? Are we really ready to sign up for 17 games of Kyle Trask? I don't know. I think guys like Jimmy Garoppolo are going to start to look really good because Jimmy, warts and all, there aren't again if there are 9 jobs open, there aren't 9 quarterbacks better than Jimmy Garoppolo. It's
Mm-mm.
just they just aren't.
Mm-mm.
They there aren't. Um, warts and all. I mean, because while I don't like to ascribe, um, I don't think you can define Jimmy by 40 and blah blah blah. There is something to the fact that he was able to not get in the way 40 times and lead these teams to, to be under center when these teams were winning all these games.
Yep.
I don't know, all giving him credit for all of it, I think is foolhardy. But to say that there's something to the fact that he's able not to get in the way enough to let those wins happen, there's something to that too. So if I'm a team like, for me, if I'm a team like the Jets, if I can't get Aaron Rodgers, I mean, and I don't, and it's kind of tricky now that you don't have to give up anything for Derek Carr. Maybe pick your poison. Do you think Derek Carr is better than Jimmy Garoppolo? I don't know. Maybe you want him, but Jimmy to me is not the worst option in the world. If if
In a
you got
particular offense, if you need a guy who throws the ball a lot, Derek Carr's probably your choice. If you need a guy who's going to game manage and who's gonna sort of run the plan, I think you go with Jimmy. Like the one thing about Jimmy that I found very interesting. So a lot of these QB analytics and metrics and these different stats that people use to evaluate quarterbacks. There's an article in the Athletic, Dave Lombardi and Matt Barrows, where they talk about the QB scenario, and they looked at all 3 quarterbacks who played last year, and by these really granular QB analytics, Jimmy Garoppolo played slightly better than Brock Purdy did. A lot of that had to do with he just didn't throw very many interceptions. But like, so if you look at it, because what we were saying earlier is Brock Purdy gets like he couldn't have fallen into a better scenario, right? Now he had to play. He could have been
Mhm.
nervous. The moment could have been too big for him, but that didn't happen. So thankfully he was able to come in and play well. But most quarterbacks in his situation, where you're down to your third guy, they're not good situations. So Brock Purdy playing with the New York Jets, or the Jets were actually halfway decent for a lot of the year, but for Arizona Cardinals, right? You throw him in that situation, and maybe those numbers don't look quite as good as does the win-loss record. So that's one thing that, because you've been saying this pretty much since Brock took over, which is, like let's have realistic expectations. And when I saw those numbers, and it was like Jimmy and Brock were pretty much equals on the playing field. I think for us, the eye test was Brock just did certain things that we don't like about Jimmy
Mhm.
a lot better than Jimmy,
Yeah.
like escaping the pass
Mhm.
rush, turning something, getting something out of nothing, throwing into the end zone and being kind of courageous about throwing into the end zone. Those are things that he did well, but at the same time, when you're looking at the value of what they did, that they weren't too different.
But
Brock
to
had a
be
much better team to play with offensively than Jimmy did at the beginning of the season.
and to be fair, to be completely fair, Jimmy was playing some of his best football when he got hurt. I mean,
Yeah.
so those numbers don't really surprise me because he was playing really good football. And that's another thing that we need to bear in mind is that, coming from with his pedigree, what Brock did was very, very impressive. But we won 13 straight. Jimmy was on a heater as well. So it wasn't like Brock came in and everything just kind of opened up. Jimmy won, I believe it was 4.5 of those games as well. So I mean, we were playing well
Yeah.
prior to Brock. And I don't want to diminish what he did, but when we talk about the catalyst of that winning streak, I still believe that it was Christian McCaffrey
Yeah.
that was the one who it was his addition to the offense because again, like I say, Jimmy was playing really good football up until his injury. So again, um I want to give him his flowers. I guess overall that was the thing I want to say is Jimmy was playing really good football at the time that he got hurt, and Brock just came in and kept things going, and like you said, showed us some things that we didn't see from Jimmy in terms of challenging the ball down three, keep challenging the throwing it downfield, particularly to Kittle, and keeping plays alive and kind of helping out his offensive line.
All right, we spent a lot of time talking about QBs. I'm happy to do so because that is the big thing on the minds of 49ers fan. But in the last 15 minutes or so, I do want to hit two other topics, and we can hit them fairly quickly here. I wanted to look at the free agency for the 49ers. Now, there are a few restricted free agents near the bottom, as you can see. Juwan Jennings. What did ERFA stand for when we looked at this the last time?
It's an exclusive rights free agent.
Okay, that's what it was. So those guys, if the 49ers want them back, are more than likely going to be back. Looking at this list really quickly, and for audio folks, this is a list of all of the 49ers free agents and sorted by their 2022 year salary. At the top of this list as a free agent is Jimmy Ward. He made almost $10 million last year. Garoppolo's at 7. We've already said that he's not gonna be back. Samson Ebukam is at 6. Emmanuel Mosley is just under 5. McGlinchey is also 4.5. Al Shire is just under 4. Robbie Gould probably gonna do the whole let's bring him back for 1 year again kind of deal. So that is a good chunk of people who played a lot of football for the 49ers there. Tashawn Gibson, was tremendous. He is going to be worth more than that 1.1 million that he made last year. Who stands out on this list as we really, really need to do whatever it takes to bring this guy back?
You know what? It's to me, I know he is a polarizing dude, but I just don't see how we replace Mac. I don't see how we replace McGlinchey. You look at the guys that we have on the roster, it's Moore, McKivitz, and I don't know how to say my man's name. Z-Man. Moore, he just can't seem to get out of his way.
Yeah.
Z-Man really hasn't played. And while in the tape that he's put out there, McKivitz is a much better pass blocker than Mac. He's nowhere near the run blocker. Yeah. So based on the fact that we are a run first team, I don't think that makes much sense. And then when you look at where Mac lines up league wide, he profiles as like the 25th best tackle in the league. And I don't think we're going to sign anybody above him on the list for less money. So then the whole drafting his replacement at 99 or
yeah, we'll get to that
or further is problematic at best. So that would be, I would try to do everything I could to re-sign him at something as I just don't think that said, I don't know how close to market value we can even get within the confines of our salary cap with all the other um, moves that we have to make. First of all, being just based on the way we have always allocated cap resources, defensive line has always been the top priority. And we've got, of course, Nick, but then we've got, guys like Ebukam, and we've got a lot of holes to fill there. So that being said, I would prioritize Mac, but that being said, I just don't know how we would be able to do it.
The one that's the most intrigued, because I agree with you with McGlinchey. I mean, they're going to probably have to pay him 3x what he currently makes, maybe a little bit less than 3x.
Yeah.
And that'll be a tough pill for 49er fans to swallow.
Yeah. I mean, but saying what you just said, if they could get him at $15 million, I sign. If he's willing to take that, I sign that on the first day of free agency.
Yeah.
Because his market value is saying that it's $16 to $18 million, which at 18, I don't see how they do it.
Yeah.
I think if he's willing to take 15, I think you bite the bullet, and because you're not going to get a player better than him at that number anywhere else. You're just not. So
the guy that I have my eyes on is Jimmy Ward, because they took away a little bit of his value in the open market by putting him in the slot. And I imagine there are teams who are going to look at him as not being put in the slot. If you could, would you rather them pay Gibson more money or just bring Ward back and let Gibson go? Like, what would be the play there for you?
Well, here's the thing. Based on Spot Track, they're saying that in the open market, Jimmy Ward's value, when you look at other comparable players, he's right around $7 million. Which number one, I would imagine that he's looking to go back to safety. I don't think that you're going to be able to have him negotiate against himself and trying to slot him as a slot corner. Because as he has said, the only reason he played slot is because Kyle told him if he wanted to play. That's where he had snaps for him.
Yeah.
Is that, he basically said that Gibson is taking your job. And so if you want to play, you're going to play in a slot. So I don't think that is going to be an option. And I think Tashawn Gibson, he made $1 million last year. I think that a 2x or 2.5x bump for him, if the 49ers pay him $3 million, I think he's happy.
Yeah,
with
that'll be interesting.
With a $3 million salary to be the starting safety. So you're not going to, whatever you're going to do, Jimmy Ward is not. I don't see it in the cards for him here as a starting safety, because I think there will be deals out there for him. Even if Spot Track is wrong and the number isn't 7 million, it's not going to be 2.5 or 3.
Yeah.
I just don't see that in the cards for him. So as much as I love Jimmy and would love to have him back, I just don't see where that happens, because I think it's much more likely that our slot is on the roster, be it somebody like Womack or Thomas or Knight, who was was on the practice squad. Even if we're saying that Demo is the 2, I don't know. Is Thomas back in the mix? Because I really still don't know what went on with him, because it seemed like at the end of the previous season that Thomas was the heir apparent to that 2 spot you know, because of the way he had played, and then obviously E-Man came back and took that job, and then my man just kind of fell off a cliff. It seemed like kind of in a similar way to the way Demo's season had ended the previous season, where he was the one getting the reps, and then he just kind of disappeared. That's what kind of happened with Thomas. So I don't know, but our history says that we don't really spend a whole lot of money on those positions when we have guys that we have invested draft capital in sitting on the roster. It seems like we want to give them every opportunity to take those jobs, rather than spending big money on free agents. If we just look back to last season and what happened with Tomlinson and Key and DJ Jones, those roster spots were filled with guys who were on the roster already. So it's going to be interesting to see how free agency shakes out. But then you can always also, if you want to push back on me, you can point to that big money signing of Mooney was not really. It was kind of out of character, but then if you go back, you look at it. You could point to the Richard Sherman signing as a precedent there. So while I'm someone who, and I've had people in these forums push back on me about how nothing, is nothing as a precedent. If it's never, just the fact that it's never happened before doesn't 100% guarantee that it won't happen, in the future. But just the way my mind works, I'm always looking for comps and, playing the percentages more so than saying, well, anything could happen. Well, you're right. I guess anything could happen, but
that's not analysis.
Yeah, exactly. I would much rather look at what the precedents have been, and that I spend a lot of time looking at how our cap breaks down. Where do we normally spend money? How do we allocate our resources? Where do we allocate our resources to try to determine what I believe is probable to happen? Does that mean that that's what's going to happen? Of course not. But I think just the way my mind works, that is how, when I fill out my little cap sheet, which I know doesn't mean anything because I'm not the GM. John Lynch's cap sheet is the one that makes.
Yeah, but when you do that exercise, you sort of understand how hard it is, and you understand where, if they have to make a hard decision, as a fan, you're like, yeah, I get it, because I was looking at it, right?
Yeah, I mean, so when people say, "Hey, let's sign Jalen Ramsey or trade for Jalen Ramsey," I mean, okay, but I just went through this exercise specifically. We have never spent more than 17% of our cap in the secondary. That's all players locked in. We are sitting right now at 12% of the cap. If you add Jalen Ramsey, that pushes us up to 20%. I guess and doing that, we still don't have a starting safety.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and you're going to have to trade for him with the Rams.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that could happen.
Yeah.
But it seems highly unlikely that Jalen Ramsey is the answer at corner, because we've never paid two players top of the market in this regime. We've never done it. So, I mean, could it happen? I guess. It just seems highly unlikely. So when you talk about doing these thought exercises, that's where I'm coming from with it. I'm
absolutely.
Of course it could. When you say it could happen, we could trade for Lamar Jackson. I mean, I guess theoretically that could happen.
4 for $260, baby.
It seems me and Lamar Jackson and Nick Bosa in the same offseason seems like a flight of fancy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right, before we get out of here, I just wanted to quickly because this is going to be also we'll come back to the free agency thing probably even the next time we record because there's more names on that list I want to talk about. But I have not really followed the draft all that closely in the last few years. Because the 49ers have been pretty good, for the last 3 or 4 years, so they never, outside of the Trey thing, there was who knows who they're going to draft. But because we do this show, I'm definitely going to do more of my homework. Just off the top of your head, they have 3 third-round picks, 3 5-round picks, 3 7th-round picks, and a 6. What do you think what position do you think is their main focus in trying to find players out of this year's draft?
I believe, because again, this is some place where I'm spending quite a bit of my time right now with analysis, and I'll have numbers for you guys shortly. But let me tell you what one thing I'm going to start here. Players drafted. Right now, I've done defensive line and offensive line because I think that those are the places that we need to focus. Players taken 100 or later, who the metric that I use is 500 snaps, which my methodology was thinking, okay, a starter starts 1,000 snaps is what a starter plays. You figure a guy takes over halfway through the season as a rookie, 500 snaps. That's what my benchmark was. 60, a PFF grade of 60 is replacement level player. Just an average guy is a grade of 60. How many players in the past 2 drafts that were drafted after 100 who played 500 snaps at a grade level of 60 at defensive line and offensive line? If you had to guess, what is the percentage of players who have met both those benchmarks in the past 2 seasons?
Wow. 10?
Lower.
Wow, lower than 10.
6% of players have drafted 100 or later have played 500 snaps with a grade of 6. That's a big ask. So my point is asking, and again, we've got an example. We drafted Burford in the 5th round last year, and he started, and we saw what kind of roller coaster that is. So my point is, thinking that you're going to go in and draft somebody at 100 or later and get like max replacement, that's a tough ask, man. It's a tough ask for a rookie to come in and play immediately. It's just a lot. So that being said, I would think that we are going to, our history says, as Rick says, our history says that we're going to be looking hard at defensive line there because we've done an excellent job. Again, going back, we don't spend money signing high profile defensive linemen. We just don't do that.
Yeah.
And what's interesting in my research is that this seems to be an organizational thing because it goes beyond this regime, even going back to previous regimes with Tom Sula as the defensive line coach. And now we've got Chris Zurich, who does the same thing. We draft and we sign undervalued defensive linemen, and we asked Tom Sula previously and Coach Chris now to get the most out of these assets, develop them, and then we let other people pay them. That seems to be like an organizational principle
Yeah.
rather than just a John Lynch thing. So to answer your question, I would think that those first two places, those first three picks especially, you should be able to get one or two, if not three, defensive line, because it gets tricky because I don't know. At that point, are you really drafting? You shouldn't be. I don't think you should be drafting for needs. You should be trying to look at who's the best player that you can get there. And if that kind of dovetails, if the best player there or right there in that batch of players is somebody that you need, if it fills a need, I think you do it. But if when you get to 100 and clearly the best player on your board is I don't know, wide receiver. I think you should prioritize getting the best player
Yeah.
available as opposed to just taking the best player at a need position. Unless it's close. If it's close, you take the need position. But if this guy is if your far and away best player is at a position where you feel like you're good, because that is a tricky thing. I mean, because you're only good until you're not. you're
Well,
only
to your point, there are young players who the Niners have kept in the system who should theoretically be better that in and help in those positions, right? Like Drake Jackson is not a tackle, but he
right.
should be better this year.
Mm-hmm.
They invested in him, and he even played a lot in the beginning of the season. And then Kyle just told us that he got too small and he wasn't strong enough, and
Which
that's
is
the
something.
long season.
Which is something that I can, not at that level. That's something my brother had a hard time. He always had a hard time keeping on weight.
Yeah.
Throughout a season, he couldn't eat enough to maintain his weight. And you think when you look, expand and look out at Drake Jackson, their season was 20 weeks, which is double a college season. So you just can't tell me that it was his fault that he was not prepared for what, because I mean, I believe, I just don't think that going into that season that any people can tell you what it's going to be like, but until you experience what 20 weeks of football is, I just don't think you can grasp
Yeah.
what it is to prepare for that kind of attrition. So I think going into this off season, he'll have a much better idea of what it is he needs to do to be ready to play all that football.
The other thing to your point, Banks coming into his third year, Burford going into his second year.
Again, got Banks. He wasn't a rookie last season, but he had never played a snap.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can pick up certain things. I believe you can probably pick up through osmosis, but again, it's got to be a different deal.
Yeah.
When you're asked to play 1,200 snaps. So again, I would expect a bump from both of them. And then Burford, I mean, he went from college to playing, a significant amount of snaps. And what we saw with him is that he is clearly talented enough to play in the NFL. It's just he was wildly inconsistent. And I think you just have to chalk that up to inexperience.
Yeah.
So,
and they coached him. They didn't just let him go out there and fail. They started alternating, and probably on the sidelines, I'm sure he was studying a lot of the stuff that they were seeing, that that was the issue. So yeah, they coached him hard during the season.
Yeah.
Okay, so we left a little bit of meat on the bone. We'll be able to come back to this in the next show, and talk a little bit more about the free agency stuff too.
But I think one before we go, I think Rick made a point about players like DJ Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, when you guys are doing, I'm seeing a lot of mock drafts, And that's wonderful. That PFF mock draft thing is awesome. But dig a little deeper. We don't want this. I don't. Number one, I'm going to get on my soapbox for just a minute. I'm going to get out of here. I know we're going way long, but mock drafts are dumb to me, especially when
What
you're
about the
talking about
grades the next day?
especially when you're talking about. I think they're kind of dumb, even when you're talking at the top of the draft. But when
Yeah.
you're talking about pick 100, get out of here. What you're talking about is you have doped out all the other teams' picks
Your intel that you
and
got
all
from
of our picks
Yeah.
that this guy at 100 is going to be our guy. Look, man, when we look at the ratings and you say at 100, based on all of these various sites and whatnot, these are the players that are likely to be available at 100. Then when you cross-reference that with our needs, and then if you cross-reference that with the type of players that profile to us, like kind of Rick said with DJ Jones, who's a DJ Jones type player who might be available at 100? These are the guys that kind of profile to who we kind of like to play. And I know that's a lot. It's a lot to do, but that's where I'm at with it. I don't. PFF says this guy is the 100th rated defensive tackle. What system did he play? And does he even fit what we do? Because not all players do. So just kind of take a look at that, guys. I'm just saying, if the offensive tackle that they are projecting here played in an air raid system where he was dropping back 70 times a game and never drove block once, he probably didn't fit what we do as a right tackle. I'm just saying, just kind of give that some consideration. Off soapbox. Okay. But we're going to come back to this. There's going to be a lot of pre-draft things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, perfect. That was great. It was great to be back. I was a little bit worried about the 2-week cadence because it's whenever you get out of that 1-week rhythm, sometimes you're like, a little bit. I'm not, this doesn't feel the same. But I think we picked right back up with the rest of the season. So that was great.
And as you see, we will find stuff to talk about. I don't think we're going to have time filling the hour.
Absolutely. If anybody needs to shoot me an email, gg@bspnmedia.com. Check out the website, bspnmedia.com. And yeah, check out the be on the lookout for the new show if you haven't already heard it.
And I'm going to really start hounding you guys especially in We Want Winners, to get into this discourse, because, there's not a whole lot going on now, but I would really love that to become as active.
Yes.
As we move, as we get to free agency, as we get to the draft, I would love for the discourse to be as active and lively as our group.
You can, if you want to join the Discord, just go to the BSPN Twitter account. The pinned post in that Twitter account has a link for the Discord invite, and that link does not expire, so you can just click that and join. And really, what Rod, saying that it's really where we want to get all the conversation going, because I'm not giving Facebook any more money. I'm going to figure out how to get my account completely wiped, which will probably wipe out all of my groups and pages, unfortunately. But I just don't want them to keep making money off of my stuff if they're not going to let me back on for no reason whatsoever, because they still haven't told me. But yeah, Discord, it may be a little scary, but it is super fun. I've sort of learned it with another community that I had. So when I start doing the recruiting and when I start building stuff for the Discord, it'll be good stuff. There are lots of things we can do with it that are really, really fun. So, all right. For Rod, I'm Double G. We'll be back in a couple weeks. See you when we see you. Peace.